Good morning, everybody, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here. A special word of thanks to STEPS and SPRU for inviting me and for continuing the conversations. I think if there is a lesson learned in the process that we went through during the Rio+20 preparation, is that it's all about keeping the conversation on. And the questions alive. And yesterday was quite interesting to see this need to have answers. But when we discuss really science for policy and policy for science, I think what we need is to keep the questions alive. And although scientists question a lot, I would say that society does it even better. So if we want really to discuss global structures for policy advice at the global level, we have to look at society as one of the major core factors. Let me start by just sharing with you how I see effective structures for scientific advice at global level. The first characteristic of any structure is that it has to work across scales. Today's world's local decisions have global impact. Global decisions have local impact. It has to be able to mobilize and engage a multitude of stakeholders. It cannot be just between governments and scientists, between companies and governments, but it does have to have a multitude of stakeholders, and whatever format we choose, we have to take that into consideration. Of course, science evidence has to be embedded in decision making, but not just at the end of that process. It's really about influencing. How do you design policy making processes with scientific evidence so that you can act, in fact, in the several moments where that decision is being formed, and you can guarantee the necessary engagement of the stakeholders that they have the responsibility to take those decisions. So it's not just about saying to a policymaker, these are the facts, these are the scientific evidence, and I would advise you to go this way at the end of the process. But how do you design that process so that scientific evidence can indeed be part of it? And therefore, making easier the discussion, and yesterday Anne, I think, made a very strong point about how do you reduce uncertainty when you give policy advice. One way of doing so is by embedding scientific evidence through the process and not to the end product only. It's also about responding to development challenges, and I think that's why we are all here. It matters. Whatever we do, individually or collectively, in any place in the world, it does matter to the rest. But that means that you have to have global sustainability as the framing issue, but also taking into consideration that there are short and medium-term priorities, and I will come back to that a little bit later. And finally, and that's a point that I really defend strongly in several of the initiatives, it's about also building capacity. Whatever interaction we have, and as scientists we have that responsibility, the capacity to understand knowledge, to use knowledge, to take the right decisions, should be part of a policy advice process. And this is fundamental because the distribution of our community is not equal in the world. We have places where there is no scientific community big enough to make a difference. And there are other places that have quite a lot of people addressing these issues. So it's about using the policy advice processes and structures to really multiply the faces and to amplify the voices of scientists. And I think we have really to build this into whatever structures we build. So, but what are the challenges in trying to bring all these dimensions to these kinds of structures? And again, yesterday, the issue of language, science communication, and how to make complexities seem simpler. How do you reduce uncertainty? How do you promote evidence-based decisions? So the language issue, it's really something that we have to work out. And as a scientific community, we do have to open ourselves up. And I think that the science communication experts have a lot to play, and ideas of giving extra skills, different skills to science graduates in our universities is also something that I hope more and more universities will take on board, because it's not enough that you are a great scientist if you cannot communicate and if you cannot understand the language of the other stakeholders that you have to engage with in order to have to take the right decisions. It's also about communication channels, from traditional to new ones. Yesterday we heard the importance of the social media in many of the decisions and many of the movements, societal movements in favor of science. And we have to learn how to use those communication channels better, how to engage science centers, science museums, science journalists, really to open a larger diversity of channels that can reach everybody. It's also about the issues that are covered by that advice. It's always a problem when you have these structures. What kind of question are we addressing? And who is posing those questions that we have to address? And also the time scale of some of those questions. And I think this is something that of course we struggle. Governance models used to address several agendas. Yesterday in the last panel we heard about the different agendas, about the same resource, about the same decision-making processes. How to keep these questions alive so that the different answers can be constructed together and really making the policy advice process an enriching and empowering one. Of course, there are quite a few opportunities, and Bob will dwell on it much more deeply. But we have several moments, and we shouldn't lose the momentum that was created in Rio+20. For many people, Rio was a failure. I say no, not at all. For the first time, we have science in the agenda, in the international agenda. We have the creation of the UN Secretary General Scientific Advisory Board, and UNESCO is leading this process and hosting the Secretariat. We have Future Earth, a research initiative that UNESCO is proudly associated with. The next ECOSOC that's going to discuss sustainable development choose science and culture as the drivers for sustainable development. We have a growing number of meetings that discuss science diplomacy. How does science engage with diplomacy? And how does diplomacy at the international level utilizes the knowledge that the scientific community can bring to really take these decisions? But the reality is that we need more. We need much more. The conversations cannot stop. And the scientific community has a responsibility to maintain this engagement. We cannot wait for policymakers, be them in the government, be them in the business community. They will do their business. It's up to us to maintain that engagement, and really this meeting, it's a good example that that engagement is there, and we need to learn from Rio that is not so much the end result, that how many times science comes into the document, in the final document, but it's how the processes are being influenced. And I'm very happy this morning I was informed by Bob that he's the UK representative for the debate on sustainable development goals. I mean, it's great news. We have a scientist representing a very important government in such an important process. This is again from the process, the preparation process for Rio+20. So we need to keep the engagement and believe that we can make the difference. But really, let me go now a little bit more in depth to some of these ideas. The main issue that we are really facing, it's poverty. We like it or not, it's poverty. And poverty does not go well with ideas of global sustainability. It really doesn't. And it's not only poverty about not having enough to eat, enough to house to sleep or a roof to sleep, you know, education for your children. It's really about having enough knowledge and empowerment to take the right decisions for you, for your community, and for the rest of the world. And more than half of the world don't have that capacity. And whatever advice we give, this is the background that we have to have with us. It's also, we are living also in a world that is globalized, that is facing very important crisis, a lot of uncertainty. And it's not only the scientists that have to face and love uncertainty. I think today to be a good politician, you also have to start learning how to deal with uncertainty, because that's the motto of the day. And where knowledge and technology, it's more and more important, but where you see more exclusion, more people that can't use that to take the right decisions, and therefore you have bigger devices. So this creates all these polarities. In one hand, we have short-term government agendas, but we need long-term policies, because you can't build a path towards global sustainability if you don't have long-term policies. You have economical interests. Of course, we need to feed our people. We need to see that we are growing. But at the same time, we have to consider the social and the environmental sustainability that most of the time is not there. We have disciplines that we know very well, but at the same time, the kinds of questions that science today has to answer, they need interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary even science. And that's not easy for us to do it. It's getting better, but we are not there yet. We have a lot of known connections, and they appear to be straightforward, but the reality, there are hidden connections that most of the time the science policy advice doesn't permeate. And so there are these invisible channels that we can't influence yet, because sometimes we don't even know about them. So we need to explore also these connections, and this is a polarity between what is visible and what is not visible. Certainty, uncertainty, very much discussed yesterday. Political objectives, languages, versus what science, how science frames their work, how science communicates the results. And the question of power. It's individual and coalition power versus citizen solutions. How do we deal with also an unfair, I would say in many aspects, distribution of power? And how does that, it's able, that an even distribution of power is able to mobilize the social solutions that are there. But because there is this uneven power, most of the time they are not considered. So these are the polarities, and when you do policy advice, you have to take those into consideration. And what we talk today everywhere, even myself, all the time, science policy interface is the word. We need that, we need dialogue. But the reality is that they touch each other in a very opportunistic way. As a politician, I have a very hard decision to make. Is a what topic? I have a science advisor or not. I know a very good friend of mine, it's a good scientist. I ask advice. Very opportunistic, not constant, not building really science evidence to the processes of decision making. Just a very punctual one. So the question is, in this science policy interface, what is really the meaning of the S? Is the S about science, or is the S about society? And this is the idea I want to throw to you. When we speak about science policy interface, the S is really about society. Because unless science engages with society, it's going to be very difficult for science to engage in a constant and fruitful manner with policymaking. And we need to discuss how do these three things, these three worlds, really get together. And for me, it's really this connection between science and society that will reinforce and embed evidence, scientific evidence in decision-making processes. Because the policy-making arena, it's very much to link to society. And this is something that in many of our science policy interface, many of these structures, we forgot that the S, and I say we, science, we forgot the S. It's really not about science, but it's about science responding to society and creating this social contract between science and society. So finally, if indeed we need to do this, my next challenge is that we do need to change our leadership. We need to go from a leadership that have the responsibility to give directions, to protect, to resolve conflicts, to a leadership that is much more strategic, a leadership that can anticipate. Yesterday, many times, it was said, and Jill, you said that very strongly, a lot of the decision-making processes, when they engage with us, they want an answer now, not yesterday. And scientists cannot say, sorry, but I need 6 months to study it, or to prepare a policy briefing. So we need to anticipate what are the needs that policy-making processes will have, so that we can start preparing. We did that quite successful when we were organizing Planet Under Pressure, because we knew that the Global Sustainability Panel was going to address some of the issues that the conference was going to address. But the timing was wrong. We had the conference much after the report was produced. So what did we do? 2 years before, we did the policy briefings, the white papers, and we engaged the scientific committee of the conference, engaged with the Global Sustainability Panel, so that even before the conference happened, the messages from the scientific community, they were being delivered in different forms and in different forms of engagement with a panel that played a huge role in defining the post-Rio+20 process, because it was, in fact, the Global Sustainability Panel in their report that proposed the UN Scientific Advisory Board that talked about the importance of science in defining the new goals, the post-2015 agenda. So really this anticipation is fundamental. More than protecting, and yesterday someone said, you just have to say, I don't know. It's true. It's not protection, it's engaging. Say, I don't know, because probably we are asking the wrong question. Can you help us to frame the right questions? And then together we find it. It's about co-design, co-production of knowledge, and I'm sure Bob will go into that. And it's about conflict stimulation more than conflict resolution. Conflict can be a very good thing because you have different perspectives. But it's about questioning right and maintaining that ability to constantly question oneself and the others in an engaging way that will allow us to really maintaining the necessary quality of science, the timely delivery of scientific evidence for policy-making processes. Finally, it's about values. It's values about having common good. It's about a culture that is knowledge-based. It's about authenticity. It's not so much about do we have consensus or dissensus. It's how authentic I am as a scientist in relation to my work, to my results. Because that's trust. If I'm authentic, you trust me. Even if you think I'm not good for you, because I'm not giving the answers you need. But at least you respect me, because you know I'm authentic. And I think this is a very important value. It's about openness, and I think Miles yesterday mentioned that several times, to be open, to engage, to be open to other people, to help us to frame the right questions for the right common issues. And it's about empathy. It's really about understanding what does it mean to be a politician or a CEO of a major company. Jill yesterday said that she was not a scientist and she had to deal with this. For me, it was the other way around. I was no politician and suddenly I was a politician. So I know what is to be in the other side, in the shoes of the politician. And sometimes we don't know how to do that well. And therefore, we don't engage enough. We are not true enough. We are not empathic enough. And I think these values are very important. Thank you very much.